for coming. Thank you for making it through the fog and the slush and everything to come out tonight. So I'm going to start by asking you a question. So I'm going to name some famous people, and I want to know if you know what they have in common. Prince William, Prince Harry, Yo-Yo Ma, and Jackie Kennedy Onassis. Anybody know what they would have in common? Anybody want to guess what they have in common?
Montessori.
There you go. Yes, there you go.
Shot in the dark there.
They were Montessori students, as well as some people on our poster over there. We have Taylor Swift. We have the co-founders of Google, Julia Child, Steph Curry. We have some famous people that were Montessori. And what you'll find when you, a lot of times when you meet somebody who is Montessori trained, then you know that they kind of can think outside the box. So sometimes I'll encounter somebody and I'll think, oh, you went to a Montessori school. And you can just tell that they're thinking outside the box, internally driven to accomplish things, and independent workers. So those are some of the characteristics that you would find. So the history of Montessori, the Montessori method was actually founded in Italy in 1907. And I love that it's tried and true and it's still working today. So it's not a method that changes with the times. It's not a method that needs to change with the times because it's still having the results. The children are still learning very well. So I have just a quote that I'm going to read about Maria Montessori. A little bit of background. Maria Montessori was one of the first female doctors. She went through and did her PhD, and she actually went to med school because she knew somebody to get her in. She was the first female there. They found it inappropriate for her to do her dissecting and her anatomy lessons with the men in the room, so she had to come back in the evenings and do it by herself. But she pushed through, she graduated, and she had done a lot of her research working with children in hospitals, so children who perhaps had some special needs and children that were poverty-stricken. So in 1907, when there was a war, the men went off to war and the women had to go off to work. So they left the children alone, so the older children in a complex would look after the younger children. That wasn't going so well. There was a lot of things that, as you can imagine, a lot of things were getting broken and damaged. And so the owners of an apartment complex decided it was actually cheaper to pay somebody to look after the children for the day than to keep repairing things. So they offered the job to Maria Montessori. She was way overqualified being a doctor, but she took this as an opportunity to watch how children learn and then develop the Montessori method from there. So it says the children were unruly at first, but soon showed great interest in working with puzzles, learning to prepare meals, and manipulating learning materials that Maria had designed. She observed how children absorb knowledge from their surroundings, essentially teaching themselves. Using scientific observation and experience gained from her earlier work with young children, Maria designed learning materials in a classroom environment that fostered the children's natural desire to learn and provided freedom for them to choose their own materials. To the surprise of many, the children in Maria's program thrived, exhibiting concentration, attention, and spontaneous self-discipline. The Montessori method began to attract the attention of prominent educators, journalists, and public figures. By 1910, Montessori schools could be found throughout Western Europe and were being established around the world, including the United States, where the first Montessori opened in New York in 1911. So that's just a little tidbit. Maria Montessori used all of the natural materials, so a lot of wood, around her to create things like the first child-size table, first child-size chair. They didn't have things like this, and so this is her observing where the children learn, how they learn, and making sure that the environment is prepared for it. And that's the role of the Montessori teacher. So we have a child who's very interested in math. We're going to make sure there's a lot of math to stimulate that child. Montessori also believes in sensitive periods. So your child might be really interested in language for a couple months. So we're feeding into that, and then they might move on to something else. So the primary job of the teacher, other than keeping the children safe, is to observe and learn how the children want to learn. So the children are learning at their own pace, and it's a multi-age classroom. So we have some 2.5-year-olds in a CASA class, and we have some senior kindergarten students in a CASA class. So the older children are role models for the younger children, and they're helping the younger children. So that makes them feel very good when they can show them how to do a job and assist them. The younger children are looking to the older children and asking them for help sometimes instead of their teachers. So it's a lot cooler to have a friend help you with something than a teacher, right? So it's a really neat mix, and those are the CASA years. So 2.5 to 5, 5-ish are the CASA years. We also, so when you're looking at the JK and SK program, what you're going to find if comparing us versus an elementary class is that we have smaller classes and smaller ratios. So you go into a kindergarten classroom and you're between 20 and 30 students, sometimes with just one educator. Sometimes you might have an EA or an ECE in there, but you could just have that. Whereas we keep our 1-to-8 ratio even through senior kindergarten. So if you find a class like this, it's going to have 16 students and 2 educators. So we have a 1-to-8 ratio, a lot more attention for your children, obviously. And then because everybody's working at their own pace, then they're able to move on in wherever they are. So I'm going to show you some math and some printing and some language jobs in a moment, and you'll be able to see, these are what some of our JK and SK students are actually working on. So I'll actually just jump right into the language. If you follow along with Montessori, you'll know that we use our sandpaper letters, and they trace them with their fingers, and we talk about the phonetic sound, because when they start to read, they need to know k, at, t, as opposed to c, a, t. So once they can identify the sound of 90% of the sounds that we have in our box, then they're actually going into reading, and they're going to start to read just 3-letter words that are phonetic based. So we want the phonetic words because we want them to build up that confidence in learning, right, and in reading. So if we're throwing out the word daughter, that's really difficult for them to learn. But we want to throw out something like sit because they can figure out how to blend those sounds. So they'll bring home some papers with some reading words on them, practice those, and then from there they go into our Bob books. And we have 12 Bob books, and the pictures are pretty simple, and that's on purpose, so it's not taking away from the words. And the words are almost all, other than the word the words are all phonetically printed so that they can sound these out, and they're building that confidence again in reading. So they would go through the Bob books, and then once a child finishes that, it's primary phonics. So again, simple pictures, and this is just one, so it just has one line of print. But by the time you get to book 12 or the larger sets, then it could have a lot, and they'll start to introduce the sight words and start to introduce things gradually. So the primary phonics, most students would end there. We've had some that graduate senior kindergarten and they're reading chapter books because they finished all these and they were just ready to move on. We also have some workbooks that go along with them. So these are comprehension books, making sure that they understand what they're reading. So that's obviously a really big part of the language development. So the students who start here are starting to print on paper, and when they first start, the goal is just to stay in that square for their printing. And then they move on to printing in a printing book. And so this is our pink line printing book, and this student is tracing letters. They will then get to the point where they're printing their own letters, their name, tracing the date, and moving on from there. So that's part of our printing program. So our language program is fantastic. We have a lot of early readers because they're building up that base, and that's what's important. If you know what the sound these letters make, you're going to be a successful reader, and you're going to enjoy it a lot better, and it's not going to be such a struggle. So some people will ask us what happens, why we don't teach them A, B, C, we teach them A, B, K. My own children, Miss Mick being one of them, was reading circles around, most children her age, and we go to the eye doctor, and she'd look at the chart and say, B, D, K. But she eventually, by about grade 1, just made that transition herself. So it wasn't anything we needed to teach, but she had that solid base of reading, and she still loves to read to this day. So I think that's fantastic. So we also have our math program, and we start with our sandpaper numbers, where we're learning about the quantity of it. So number 1, let's go find 1 book. Number 2, let's go find 2 pencils. So we're counting things one at a time instead of just reciting some numbers. From there, we work on our teen board and our 10 board. Once the children, and actually Miss Mick was just telling me that she has held a 3-year-old that's moving on to the teen board.
Actually, to shout him out, it's Jack, who's moving on to the teen board, and he is not 3 yet.
Right, okay,
He
so
blew me away, yeah. Jack is
so,
ready.
and that's an example of what can happen, right? Jack's really interested in numbers, and he's really wanting to move on, so why are we keeping him here? He's moving on to the teen board that a lot of JKs and SKs are doing, and Jack's ready for it, so Jack's moving on. So after they know their numbers, after they go through the teen board, the 10 board, and they can identify the majority of the numbers, then we actually move on to addition. So we have our addition strip board here, and it has squares for all the numbers. So they get their addition question here. So this one says 2 plus 8. I'm just going to pick it up so you can see. So 2 goes across the board. You can see it goes to 2. Then you add the 8, and you can count the squares and know what 2 plus 8 is. So this is the introduction to addition, because addition can be a really hard concept to understand. But here you're understanding that you're adding them and it increases. And after the addition strip board, they can move on to counters and all kinds of other jobs. So we had one child actually that went through us for 3 years, and by the time he graduated senior kindergarten, he was doing addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. So not every child is, but some children are really interested. Perhaps that will be Jack. Some children are really interested in math and numbers, and we just keep going with them. That child went on between the summer of SK and grade 1. His mother taught him long division, so he was really interested in math. And then the other thing I want to talk about is our sensorial area. So you've probably seen the pink tower here that has it's right now it's mixed with the brown stairs. But the pink tower is entry-level job in Montessori. You're going to see it in most Montessori classrooms. They're going to build the blocks from biggest to smallest, build the tower. So they're learning all kinds of different skills. They're all pink because they want to be able to concentrate on the size. So they're building this tower from biggest to smallest. And the brown stairs, similar, they're building them horizontally from biggest to smallest to make stairs. So that's level 1. And then once they've mastered that, whether they're still in CASA or whether they're in JK, once they've mastered that, we have a whole book of extensions that they can work with the teachers to build. So they can mix them, they can make different patterns. There are even some where you shut the shades and there's some shadows, so it's quite cool. So you can see one of our extensions right here. So a student would have to pick the biggest brown stair, the biggest pink tower, and go on and make a pattern. So even though they're in the same classroom that they were in for the last year or 2 years, they are actually able to do some different jobs that are more advanced. Similarly, we have our red rods on the floor here. So the red rods are something that the children are first learning how to carry, because you can imagine how tempting this is to start a jousting match. So their first thing is that they're actually just learning how to carry them properly to their mat and line them up from longest to shortest. Once the child masters that and understands the differences in size, there's one of the extensions is to build this red rod maze, and then all the friends can take off their shoes and walk through the maze, and it's a big hit. So these are an example of some of the jobs that would grow with them, if you will. So they start with some basics and move into the extensions so that they're still being challenged even if they are in senior kindergarten. So that's a little bit about our